So the Social Justice Colloquium is a collaboration of criminal justice faculty, including Dr. Forrest Rogers and Dr. Amanda Houghton-Norcutt. And we're just some important social justice issues, a variety of different social justice issues. And as especially criminal justice majors, I'm sure you guys are aware that wrongful convictions is a topic that has gotten a lot of attention from policymakers, researchers, and the general public. So we thought it would be a really good idea to bring in Dennis Marr to speak about that topic. To date, 2,161 individuals in the United States have been exonerated for crimes that they did not commit. Some of these individuals have been on death row. Altogether, they've served more than 18,750 years in prison for these crimes. And not surprisingly, this has gotten a lot of attention. While we do have data on the number of individuals who have been exonerated after being wrongfully convicted, there's no clear data on the total number of individuals who have been wrongfully convicted. But the Innocence Project estimates that it's between 2 and 5% of all individuals that are currently incarcerated right now. Even if we go on the conservative end of that, it translates numbers-wise into about 20,000 individuals. If you go on the higher end, it's about 130,000 individuals. So the number of wrongful convictions that we are aware of, some people argue is only the tip of the iceberg. So it's a really important issue. So we're very fortunate today to have Dennis Marr as our speaker for this event. He was wrongfully convicted of 2 rapes and a sexual assault that occurred all in Massachusetts in 1984. And he was given a life sentence. He served 19 years in prison and was exonerated through DNA evidence in 2003. He was featured in a 2005 film called After Innocence, which is a powerful documentary that features 8 individuals who were wrongfully convicted and later exonerated. He also he spent his free time doing speaking engagements to bring awareness about the issues of wrongful convictions. And he has been an outspoken advocate for reform in these areas, specifically reforms related to DNA access laws, evidence preservation laws, eyewitness misidentification reforms, and compensation laws in several different states, including Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Maine, Vermont, and even Colorado. So he's definitely using his experience to try to help move along reforms, which is really important. So without further ado, I'm sure you guys are all waiting to hear Dennis speak. Let's all welcome Dennis.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. In 1978, I graduated from high school, makes me old, and enlisted in the Army. I went through basic training in Missouri, advanced individual training in Missouri, and from there I went to Fort Benning, Georgia, and went to jump school and became a paratrooper. From there I was stationed at Fort Bragg, North Carolina with the 7th Special Forces. While there I volunteered to serve overseas and served in Italy with the 1st of the 509th. While in Italy I re-enlisted because I planned on doing 20 years in the military and retire. I re-enlisted to come home to Massachusetts and be stationed at Fort Devens with 10th Special Forces. While there, I got off a jump status to work in my field, which was heavy equipment. And on the night of November 17th, 1983, I was walking down Westford Street in Lowell, and I was stopped by the police. So I gave them my identification. They ran a background check, and they came back negative because I didn't have a speeding ticket or anything. I had no trouble with the law in my life. So then they searched me, and they arrested me for possession of marijuana. They booked me, they brought me to the police station. Well, they arrested me, brought me to the police station, booked me. And on the next morning in Lowell District Court, they did what's called an in-court identification. They took me out of the docket and they sat me on the bench. And they brought the victim in and let her walk around the courtroom to see if she could identify someone. She identified somebody else, so the judge gave me 6 months probation for possession and said, you can leave. Now at this time, I was in my stocking feet. It's November. And as I was leaving in the courtroom, the police arrested me again and charged me with the crimes that the judge said they had no grounds to go forward on. So they set my bail at $10,000, $1,000 cash. and took me to Bereka House of Correction. My parents bailed me out. And then I went to my first lineup. It was me, 6 police officers. All the police officers were standing behind a railing. I was standing behind a chair. I was ID'd. I really don't remember the second lineup, but it went along similar situation. So then on the night of January 5th, 1984, the police came to my house and arrested me again. Excuse me. So I said, "What are you arresting me for?" And they told me, "Well, we're handing you over to the Air Police Department, talk to them." So they got me to the police station, they gave me to the Air Police Department, and they brought me to the Air Police Station. On the way, I asked, "What am I under arrest for?" "Shut up." So I asked again, "What am I under arrest for?" They said, "Shut up." So being a stubborn soldier, I said, "Well, what am I under arrest for?" And finally they said, "You're under arrest for aggravated rape." I said, "Well, where did these crimes happen?" They said, "It happened at the Casa Manor Motel in Air." I said, "Where's that?" And I never found out where the Casa Manor Hotel was until about 3 years ago when I went and spoke in Air. And so they put my bail at $50,000 cash. January 5th, 1984 was my last day of freedom. So I went through another lineup, which I really don't remember, because by then I was overwhelmed and depressed and everything else that was happening to me. So in March of 1984, I went to trial in Lowell. I got found guilty, and the judge said, "Mr. Maher, do you have anything to say?" Being a stubborn soldier, I said, "Yes, Your Honor." I said, "If you call this justice, I think you and your whole judicial system are a crock of shit." "You don't say that to a judge." So he sentenced me to 20 to 30 years in prison. In April of 1984, I went to my second trial. I was found guilty again. I had a really bad lawyer. And the judge said, "Mr. Maher, do you have anything to say?" I said, "No, Your Honor." So he sentenced me to life in prison. Now, second-degree life means you have to do 15 years till you're eligible for parole, but they never have to parole you. So now I'm 23 years old, doing 20 to 30 years in prison, a second-degree life sentence for possession of marijuana, in my opinion, because I didn't do the crimes I was in prison for. So I went to Walpole. While there, I got cut. I got 3 stitches here and 14 stitches across the back of my neck for being in prison for a sex offense. Even though I didn't do it, it didn't matter. I was in a sex offender. So while there, I talked to a Dr. Moore, who would do a civil commitment, which means that I would become a sexually dangerous person. So I fought going to court, and finally I got transferred to Gardner from Walpole. While at Gardner, I kept fighting going to the treatment center, and finally I just got frustrated and said, "All right, just send me to the treatment center." So I went to the treatment center and ended up getting committed for 1 day to natural life as a civil sentence, which is a bigger sentence than the ones I had. Now, the reason to get committed is multiple crimes, denial, violence, and assorted other things. It depends on the crimes that you went for. Well, I had violence, I had multiple crimes, and I didn't do them, so that's why they gave me the civil sentence. Now, when I was at Walpole, I got a letter from my lawyer saying that he'd been disbarred for a year. So now I got to learn how to file motions, how to get a lawyer appointed to me. Now, I don't know how to do this. I've never been in trouble with the law. So I went down to law library and I had people that helped me. So I filed a motion for appointment of counsel, and they gave me a lawyer for my appeals. And he didn't raise any of the issues that I wanted him to raise, which was identification, the police broke into my car, among other things. He raised that the 2 Lowell trials were trialed together, which made them wrong, but in actuality they happened 1 day apart and they had the same MO, so why argue about it? So now my appeals are denied, and I'm committed to the treatment center. And now I have to start learning to do legal work. I filed a Rule 30. I filed a habeas corpus. I filed a motion for a paternity test just to see if the blood from the crimes matched my blood. So as this went on, it got to be 1993, and I was walking back to my cell, and everyone's yelling, "Dennis, put on Phil Donahue, put on Phil Donahue." Now this was before Maury Povich and all, Jerry Springer and stuff. And Barry Scheck was on Phil Donahue talking about the Innocence Project and how they do DNA testing to prove innocence of people. So my friend Bob, who has since died, helped me find the address to New York, and I wrote them a letter asking for help. And they sent me back a 28-page questionnaire, which I filled out and sent back to them. Then they sent me another 28-page questionnaire. I guess they wanted to compare the two to see if I was making mistakes. And so now they started working on my case. Students work on the cases at the Innocence Project. And they start looking for evidence. They read through the files. They also wanted me to send them a copy of everything I ever filed in the courts. So I ended up sending them probably 1,200 pages of documents of things that I had filed, my trial transcripts, among other things. So now the students, they call the police department looking for evidence. They call the courthouse looking for evidence, and they kept getting told, the evidence has been destroyed. The evidence has been lost. And so they got frustrated. So in 1997, Barry Scheck got a lawyer in Massachusetts to file a motion for DNA testing in front of my sentencing judge, which everything I ever filed had to go in front of him. Well, the sentencing judge wasn't on good terms with me, so he denied everything I ever filed. So now I'm hopeless. You know, my DNA testing is denied because of the judge sitting at, has a grudge against me, in my opinion. So about 1995, I get a letter from a reporter, John Element, from the Boston Globe. He says, I'd like to do a report on you. I want to do an article on DNA testing in Massachusetts. I said, okay. So he came down and we talked for probably 2 hours. And finally I said, John, who sent you? He goes, oh, you know who sent me. I said, no, I don't have a clue. He goes, well, I was in Boston Superior Courthouse, and J.W. Carney, who prosecuted me back in 1984, was there. Now, J.W. Carney is a prominent attorney in Massachusetts. He just got done representing Whitey Bulger. And he goes, I approached him and I said, Jay, you know, let me do an article on a couple of the cases that you've done. He represented a guy who blew up an abortion clinic and another guy who killed his wife and brought his kids down to see. And but he says to me, he says, listen, if my hunch is right and you do this, you may get a Pulitzer Prize out of it. Go see Dennis Mayer. So he sent John Element to see me. Now, John Element didn't do the article on me. He did it on Ulysses Rodriguez Charles, who was proven innocent through DNA, and Benjamin Laguerre, who had a DNA match. But he told me, he said, your judge is retiring next summer. He says he's retiring in June. The day my judge retired, I called the New York Innocence Project and asked them if they could help me. He goes, well, I'm not supposed to take this case, but if you call the New England Innocence Project at Testa, Hurwitz, and Tebow and see if they can help you. So I wrote them a letter asking for help, and I got a 28-page questionnaire, and I filled that out, and then I got a letter asking me for everything I've ever filed in the courts, and I sent that to him. And then one day I'm walking back to my cell from work. I worked in the staff kitchen. And he says, Maher, you have an attorney visit. He goes, I haven't had an attorney in 14 years. He says, well, you got one now. So I went up and I saw Eliza Kaplan and Karen Burns. Eliza Kaplan was the lawyer, and Karen Burns was a student. At the time, it was Southern Mass University, and they were there to represent me. So as you can imagine, I was quite emotional. You know, and we started talking, and finally she says, who's the officer in the trap? I says, I have no idea why. She says, well, we come in, and he asked who we were, and we told him. They asked where we were from, and we told them. And finally they said, who are you here to see? And he said, Dennis Mayer. He says, well, it's about time. If anyone here is innocent, it's Dennis. And that was her introduction to me. So now they start looking for evidence, and they run into the same problems. The evidence has been lost, the evidence has been destroyed, but they have no record of it being destroyed. So Karen Burns got frustrated one day and went down hallways knocking on doors asking for help in the courthouse. And she found someone to help them on their lunch hour. Lo and behold, the person comes up from the evidence room with a box of evidence that says Dennis Mayer on it, that they said was lost or destroyed. So I called Elisa and she was all excited. Dennis, we found the evidence in Lowell. I said, awesome. And we ran a spectroscope on it to look for the presence of blood or semen. She said it came back positive. And then I called her back the next day and she says, well, we're not sure now. But what we're going to do is send the evidence to a Dr. Blake in California. At the time, he was one of the foremost forensic scientists in the country, but he wasn't recognized by the government because he hated the government. So he was doing the DNA test on it because the lab technician didn't feel comfortable because the evidence was so old. So now they got to come see me and get my blood and a mouth swab and create a chain of evidence. So they came down to the prison, called me down to health services unit, and put me in a holding cell with 5 or 6 other guys. So in comes the superintendent, the director of security, the head of the IPS, someone from the AG's office, someone from the DA's office, my lawyer, a phlebotomist, and Karen. So everyone I'm in the cell with starts flipping out because they figure they're coming to get their DNA to charge them with more crimes. So I told them, I said, just relax, they're here for me. So they took pictures of them taking my blood and sealing it in a package, taking the mouth swab and sealing that in a package. They put it in a big package, handed it to a state trooper, who took it to the state police lab, gave it to the chemist, who jumped on a plane, flew to California, and hand-delivered it to Dr. Blake. So now it's a waiting game. So on Christmas Eve 2002, Elisa told me to call her. So I called her 20 times and there was no answer. So they locked me in my cell and I come out again and I went outside because I had to cool off and I tried again and there's still no answer. So I come back in from walking the yard and the block officer says, Dennis, call your attorney. I said, I've been calling her all day. So finally I called her and I says, where were you? She says, oh, we were out celebrating. We had 2 exclusions and you were one of them. Now what an exclusion means is the DNA doesn't match. It could be the victim had sex with their boyfriend the night before or something else along those lines. Now they got to go talk to the victim, who they have to say, you may have sent an innocent man to prison after 19 years. As you can imagine, the victim freaked out. Excuse me. So they had to go back a second time. Now this is Martha Coakley who's going to see the victim. And the victim was still freaked out. And they said, well, can we have permission to look at the hospital records? Now the only way the hospital records can be seen is through a court order or permission from the victim. So they gave the victim gave them permission to look at the hospital records. And in the hospital records, it showed that she was a virgin when she was raped. So that exonerated me in Lowell. So now I'm cleared of 1 crime, the 20 to 30 year sentence. I still have the life sentence. I still have 1 day to natural life. Martha Coakley calls Elisa. Do you want to make a deal? We'll give him time served and release him. Elisa was fiery tempered. She went off on Martha Coakley and said some choice words for her and said, no, we're going to prove he's innocent of everything. About 2 weeks later, a slide shows up on Martha Coakley's desk from my case. It has all my case numbers on it, the part of the rape kit. So they took the slide and they sent it to a laboratory in Maryland where they tested it for DNA. So on April Fool's Day 2003, I called Elisa and she says, when do you want to go home? Now this is April Fool's Day. I said, are you serious? She goes, yes. The DNA test came back and there's 2 different DNAs and neither one of them are yours. So I said, well, you better give me till the 3rd, because my parents are going to need to adjust to this. At the time, my father was going through chemo for leukemia. And so on the TV that night, there's my father doing interviews with every TV station in the area. So on April 3rd, I went to Cambridge Courthouse. We were late because at that time, the Zakin Bridge had just opened, and you think Boston traffic's bad now. It was dirt roads back then. So we were late. Eliza's flipping out, as usual. So I get to the courthouse. She says, it's about time. And as I'm waiting, there's a guy in the holding cell crying that he's getting a 2.5-year sentence, or a 3 to 5 or something like that. So I told him, will you shut up? I says, I'm going home after 19 years, 2 months and 29 days after being proven innocent. I didn't hear another peep out of him. So we go upstairs to the courthouse. Eliza says, you ready? I said, yeah. She goes, what do you mean, yeah? And at the time, a reporter for the Boston Globe, Dick Lear, had been following me for about 2 months to do a feature on me. So we went in the courtroom. Eliza reads the thing. I told her, I said, Eliza, you have to file a motion to dismiss the civil commitment. She goes, why? I says, if not, I'm going back to prison. She says, okay. So she filed that and filed everything else. Martha Coakley says, we're not going to go against this. We're going to go along with it. The judge says, so all I have to do is sign the papers and he can leave? And they both said, yes, Your Honor. So she signed the papers and I got to leave. First, they took me back to the holding cell, took off my wrist chains and my ankle chains, and said, you can leave. So I went out the first door, met with my parents. Went out the second door, met with my brothers and my friends who were there. Walked out the third door into 6 TV cameras and about 14 microphones all crammed in my face, asking me, how do you feel? I said, well, I'm a little overwhelmed right now. And then here comes Eliza. We have a press conference scheduled for 12 o'clock at Testa Hurwitz in Tebow. Come see us all there. So as we're leaving to leave the courthouse, the senior court officer comes up to me and says, Mr. Maher, J.W. Connie would like to speak with you. Now this is the person that prosecuted me. And so we met behind doors, and he asked for forgiveness, and I forgave him. I don't know what would have happened if I wouldn't have got an apology, but I know it has helped me to get on with my life and become the person that I am today, able to come up here and speak instead of being an angry, bitter person. But I know it affected him very bad because he told me, he says, Dennis, if you wouldn't have forgave me, he goes, I don't know if I'd be a lawyer. He goes, it affected me that bad. So from there, we went to Testa Hurwitz in Tebow and went to the press conference. And we're having a press conference, and so someone said, well, what are you going to do now? I says, well, I'm going to go make my father grandchildren. So from there, we went home. I got home, and my mother says, you're grounded. And from there, I had to start rebuilding my life. So 19 years, 2 months, and 29 days later, I have to start figuring out how I'm going to put my life back together. The next day, I went down to the registry to get a permit. I gave her my prison ID. And then she comes back and she says, your license is suspended. I said, why? She said, you got a speeding ticket from 10 years ago. I said, well, I just got out of prison yesterday after 19 years. She goes, let me get my boss. So she went and got her boss, and like an hour and a half later, they finally got it straightened out. She comes over and says, do you want to take the permit test? I said, sure. She gave me a piece of paper and a pencil, and I started answering questions. She says, oh, you've answered enough. Do you want to take your driver's test? I said, I just got out of prison yesterday. I says, give me at least a week. She says, okay. So I go back a week later, and the statey gets in my father's car. And I says, my name is, he goes, I know who you are. He goes, I just want to know who's playing you in the movie. So he says, all right, go down the street, take a right, go up the hill, take another right. Parallel park. There wasn't a car on the street. He goes, do a 3-point turn. He goes, you know, you back up, you go forward, you back up and turn around. I goes, yeah, I know. He says, all right, go back to the registry, you got your license. That was my first introduction to being a free man. So from there, now I got to start looking for a job. So I took 2 months off to get my life back together. And then I started looking for a job. I went and interviewed with one company, and then I went and interviewed with Waste Management. I got hired by Waste Management first, and then a couple of weeks later, the other company asked me if I wanted to work for them. I've been working for Waste Management for 15 years now. We do the trash in Salem, so I'm up this way all the time. And it's been good. You know, part of the process in prison was you had to do a release plan. So I told my therapist, I said, listen, I says, I'll do a release plan, but I'm not going to write it down because I may die in prison as an innocent man. She said, all right. I said, I get out of prison through DNA. I take some time off. I look for a job. I meet a woman, we get married, we have children. I get out of prison through DNA. I took 2 months off. I found a job with Waste Management. I met my wife online. We got married. We have 2 children, Joshua and Eliza, Karen, Lucy. Named after the woman who got me out of prison because there's no way I can repay her for what she did. And now I speak in colleges, high schools, state houses, wherever they need me. And life is good. Any questions?
Was there any point where you decided to accept your fate and think, this is it, this is where I'm going to spend my life?
I made peace with myself that I may die in prison. And then not long after that, a reporter came to see me. So yes, I did.
Did they ever find the person that actually committed those crimes?
They never even looked because they said the statute of limitations would have run out. But I'm sure there could have been circumstances where someone was wrongfully convicted that the statute of limitations wouldn't have run out.
Did you ever meet with the victim?
I don't blame the victims. Dick Lair, who was the reporter in my case, has met with the victims. And I told him, I said, if they ever wanted to meet, we would meet on their terms wherever they wanted to meet. And I hold nothing against them. But I've never met with them.
But how did you cope with being in prison for that long? Like, what did you do?
What do you mean, while I was in prison?
Yes.
I lifted a lot of weights. I lifted a lot of weights. I read a lot. I played sports. And I didn't get caught up in the prison lifestyle, you know, the games that go on and stuff like that, because I was busy all the time. And I always thought outside of prison.
So obviously there's a lot of people who you could have some bitterness towards. What stopped you from having that mindset?
I made a conscious choice in life to put it behind me, because if I became an angry, bitter person, I wouldn't be able to get the things in life that I wanted. So I chose to let it all go. And I'm married. I have a good job. You know, I have children. I own a house. You know, so I think I made a right choice. You know, a lot of exonerees just hang on to the angriness and the bitterness because they think it keeps them going. And I tell them, you've got to let it go to get on with your life, to become a productive person in society.
What do you think went wrong with the police work in the beginning of your case? Why were you a suspect? Were they just looking for somebody, or what do you think what happened there?
Well, they first identified me. I was on Westford Street, and they were in a parking lot probably 100 feet away at night. You figure it was November 17th. It was probably 6:30, 7 o'clock at night, and they said I fit the artist conception from 100 feet. I really think what it was is I had a red hooded sweatshirt on. They said that was the perpetrator was wearing, and so that's why they stopped me. And I think the police officer had it in his mind that he had the person. And Lowell, in the town of Air, part of the identification process, she showed the victim 10 pictures. The victim said, well, none of these look like the person who did the crime. And so the police officer says, well, you had a reaction when you looked at this picture. It was my picture. That's why I got a settlement from Air because of that. And the same police officer had 2 DNA crimes against her, or 2 DNA exonerees that she was the inspecting officer on the case. It was me and the Kenny Waters case. Now, Kenny Waters' sister put herself through school, became a lawyer, and got her brother out of prison through DNA. They made a movie about her. You know, but she was the same police officer.
You said you already accepted you were going to die and you also freedom back as an innocent man. What made you try to fight for people putting all the work for studying and learning all the law?
Hope. I had hope, you know, that someday something would happen. You know, if I keep trying, maybe something will happen sooner or later. You know, but having made peace with it, it gave me a better attitude, I think, you know, because I was still angry that I was in prison, but I don't know what it did, but it helped me a lot. You can ask questions about anything.
In your 19 years in prison, did you encounter anyone else whom you felt might have been innocent of their crimes?
One person, Bernard Barron. Me and him were in the same prison for 13 years. He got out 2 years after me, being proven innocent. He was in for, back in the 80s, there were a whole bunch of molestation cases at daycare centers. There was one in Massachusetts. He was the first case. He tried for years to get tapes of them interrogating the children, and they kept saying the tapes were lost. Then the DA on the case died, and the new DA took over and comes waltzing in the courts with a big bag of tapes and says, "These are the tapes you're looking for?" So now they went looking through all these tapes, and they found out that the police had spliced all the tapes together to where they said that the kid said this guy did it. But in most of the cases, the tapes, it said, it wasn't Bernie, it wasn't Bernie, it wasn't Bernie. And after they interrogated the children for 6, 8, 9 hours at a time, they said that it was him.
Can you talk about what we need to do more here in Massachusetts as far as compensating innocent people and the fact that there are states that still, when a person leaves, they get no services, and in certain states they get absolutely no compensation too?
There is no national compensation bill. There's a federal compensation bill, but you have to be a federal crime. Massachusetts has a compensation bill where you can get up to $500,000. That was passed in 2005. But when it was passed, Mitt Romney wouldn't sign it because he wanted it to be for lost wages. If you didn't have a job when you were arrested, you would get nothing. So the lieutenant governor signed it on the last day of the year that it could be signed. You get up to $500,000, and there's a couple of other things involved, like you get half tuition if you wanted to go back to college. I was the first one to be compensated. I got $550,000. I got $500,000, and my lawyer got $50,000. Because I filed 3 suits, because I had 3 crimes. And they made a deal with me to change it. Now, we're working on changing that law so that it could be, I don't know if there'll be a top number for it. You know, I know it's going to be at least up to $1 million. And we don't know if they're going to have the top number or not. Now, Texas probably has the best laws. You get $80,000 the day you get out, and you get $80,000 a year for the rest of your life. Wish we had it, but. You know, but there are some states where you get nothing. There are some states where you get $2,000. And that's one of the things that the Innocence Project does, works with different states around the country to help them create compensation bills, compensation laws. Because there are some where you can't sue the state. There are some, like in Louisiana, where they'll tell you, yeah, you're getting out, but you ain't getting nothing. You know, and there's other states around the country that are like that. There's no set way that the compensation laws are done.
Thank you.
I know you talked to other places about your story. Have you ever talked to current inmates about it and felt like if they believe that they're innocent or they know they're innocent?
I'm never going back to prison. While I was in, I used to tell people that if you're innocent, to contact the Innocence Project. But if you're not, don't waste their time. You know, they're a busy organization. And I just gave Gina and Amanda the phone number to work with the Innocence Project if people wanted to get involved with it. I went back to a prison in New Jersey once because someone asked me to come back, and I probably would not go back to one in Massachusetts because fearing they wouldn't let me out. My wife is a paralegal, and she called Cambridge Courthouse to get information. And she gave him her name. She says, "What's your husband's name?" I said, "Dennis." She goes, "Well, it's a good thing you're doing civil because they wouldn't give you nothing in criminal." Now, I got jury duty after I'd been out like 2.5 years. So I went in, I filled out the paperwork, both sides, even though it's only written on one side. Because they said, "Have you ever been convicted of everything?" So I put everything I was convicted of at the time. So I went to the place where you go for jury duty, and I handed it in, and he calls me up and he says, "Is this for real?" I said, "Yeah." I says, "I was released upstairs." He says, "All right, go sit down." Calls me up again, he says, "Yeah, go to the side." He goes, "This is for real?" I says, "Yeah." I says, "I was released upstairs." He goes, "Well, we think you've paid your debt to society and you can go." And I've never gotten jury duty again. Well, I'm in a movie after Innocence, and my wife was in the kitchen one day, and all of a sudden she hears, "Mommy, Daddy's on TV!" Because After Innocence was on TV. My kids know that I was in prison. They know I was wrongfully convicted. They've been to 2 conferences, which are national conferences from around that in different parts of the country where a bunch of exonerees gather. They know what the Innocence Project is about. They know what they do. They know I do a lot of stuff with the Innocence Project. And they've met a bunch of exonerees, and they met a bunch of lawyers who work for the Innocence Project, so yes, they know what's going on. They don't know the exact crimes I was in for or nothing like that. They just know their father was wrongfully convicted.
You had mentioned that when the lawyers came to see you, one of the officers said it's about time.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think that some of the personnel knew you were innocent?
I used to tell them all the time I was innocent. And I didn't carry myself the way a lot of the inmates in the prison carried themselves. I talked to a person, I looked them in the eye and talked to them. I didn't try to get correctional officers to bring me in stuff or anything like that. And it was just, I wasn't like the rest of the inmates. That's what they've told me.
Did you find that after you were released, people still had a certain opinion of you, even though you explained that you were innocent, but there's a stigma still attached?
Most of the time, no. There's 2 people who still think I'm guilty, and that would be my arresting officer, Eddie Davis, who used to be the Commissioner of Police of Boston, and Robert Barton, who was the judge in my case. They still think I'm guilty to this day.
There's no evidence against you. Why
I have no idea. When Eddie Davis was nominated to be commissioner, the Boston Globe asked me if I had anything to say. I said, no. I says, I have a $20 million lawsuit against him. Why am I going to say anything against him? And he says, well, this is off the record. He still thinks you're guilty. Because I asked him about it, and he said, yeah, I still think he's guilty. And then all of a sudden, all his people that protect him come up and said, well, he thinks it was a miscarriage of justice and all this stuff, but Jay Carney has told me that he still thinks you're guilty. He has to admit that he did something wrong. Any more?
Do you know how many other Massachusetts cases were found not guilty?
Not off the top of my head, but I know one got out a couple of weeks ago. And before that, Frederick Clay got out. He had 37 years. There's a guy from Salem, Angel Echevarria, who was in for a murder for 20 years. There's probably 30, maybe more.
Throughout like all your years in prison, I know you said your dad was going through chemo and it was hard on your family. Did they support you throughout the whole thing?
Yes, they did. At first, my parents would come visit me every weekend. And then when I went to the treatment center, it became every 2 weeks, which I understood it because it's a long drive. And then as they got older, it became a month. You know, so, but my brothers supported me, my whole family supported me.
Adding on to that, when you finally got home, did you feel isolated? Did you feel like you wanted to get back out into community, or was it hard for you?
Where I had done therapy, I didn't feel isolated. You know, I had to readjust. You know, I had to readjust to crossing the street, hearing the tires on the road, figuring out how to work a car. When I went to prison, the only alarms were you used the key to turn the alarm off and on. I got in a car, I hit the button, and every alarm on the thing went off. But those were the adjustments I had to make, the different smells. You know, walking in a long straight line instead of walking in a square or a rectangle.
Were there other like technology things or like things that happened in the world from like the 80s until the early 2000s, like the internet happened? You know, like were there things that were especially difficult to adjust to?
Well, you know the cell phones you're addicted to? I just got an iPhone. I had a flip-top phone for the longest time. Like you said, the internet. When I went in, the computers were a Commodore 64 or something along those lines. When I got out, I went on the internet. I got buried in porn and shut the computer off because I didn't know what to do. I'm still not very good with a computer because I didn't grow up with it. My kids are wizards compared to me. You know, my son tells me, yeah, I got to do this, this, this. My daughter says, Daddy, you got to do this, this. I said, oh, wonderful. Yeah. And this was when they were 7 and 6. You know, but there's still, like when I went back as a mechanic, now you can plug a computer into a truck and talk to the truck. You know, I still have a hard time with that, you know, because that didn't happen when I first went in.
As a criminal justice student and future criminal justice personnel, what do you recommend for us in order that these type of mistakes aren't really made in the future?
Well, I don't know if they can be prevented. It depends on the person who's doing the investigating, the person who's looking up what happened. It all depends on the person. You know, the laws are changing. Like there used to be lineups. You know, you don't see lineups very often anymore. When they show photos, it's called a double-blind system. The person the arresting officer is taking out of the whole thing. A person who knows nothing about the crime shows pictures one at a time. And they tell the victim, you do not have to identify someone if you don't think it's that person. The pressure on the victim to identify someone is taken away. Interrogations are now going to be filmed. There's a lot of things that have changed, but it's still on the person. If the person doesn't think what they're doing, that they have the right person, then they have to make the decision, okay, we don't have the right person. You know, instead of just putting under pressure, because when I was arrested, it was all about convictions. Everything was convictions. That's the mentality that has to change. You know, get the convictions, yes, but get the right person.
So along the way, do you think you met more people that really wanted to help you, or do you think there were more people, and sometimes you go up to a person asking for help, they right away you feel they don't want to help you?
No, a lot of people really want to help to change. Because as they say in Europe, America has the most messed up criminal justice system there is. Because a lot of it doesn't work together.
Is your lawyer appointed to you, or?
I found out after I got out that my lawyer had been disbarred for life because of my case. Because he approached my parents asking them that if he could represent me. And that's why he got disbarred for life. Because a lawyer cannot walk up to someone and ask them if they can represent you. Solicitation. So that's I found that out afterwards. And he was a horrible lawyer.
Do you know he was horrible at the time, like during the time you walked the case?
I found out during the trial as he went on, and I asked him to file a motion on this date, and he filed it on another date when nothing happened. I said, oh, this is horrible. But I didn't know how to get rid of him, you know, because I had never been in trouble with the law. Because they didn't want to go look for him, or they didn't want me to get out because then it makes them look bad because they wrongfully convicted someone. That could be this. I don't know if that's the truth or not, but that could be one of the reasons.
So outside of Carney, is there anyone else who was trying to get you convicted? Has anyone else come to you and apologized?
No.
No.
No, the judge still thinks I'm guilty, and Eddie Davis definitely thinks I'm guilty.
Hi. Does the Innocent Project deal with civil cases? I mean, I know yours was a criminal case, and God bless you. But does it deal with civil cases?
No.
No.
No, they just, at first they just dealt with DNA. Now they're starting to get into arson cases and other cases that go along, but not civil stuff.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
What's one life lesson you learned in the process?
Don't believe you're innocent till proven guilty. Because I was guilty till I was proven innocent. And I believe that. Anyone else?
Are you familiar with Stephen Avery, like the guy from Vegan to Murder? Have you ever watched it?
I know who he is. I've never watched it. I lived it. I don't need to watch it. Gina?
Yeah, so I know you've been an outspoken advocate of DNA access laws. Can you just talk a little bit about DNA access laws and the importance of them?
Well, Massachusetts was the 49th state to pass the DNA law. All 50 states have DNA laws now. It's important to have them because of people who are innocent. And a lot of the times, there is no evidence. The evidence has been destroyed because some states destroy rape kits while people are still in prison. And it also needs to be to save the evidence. You know, put it in a safe place where it won't deteriorate so fast or anything like that. But that's what needs to be done. Anyone else? In closing, I'd just like to say, yous are the future of this country. Yous are the people who could go on and change laws. Who knows, one of yous could be senators or politicians, or one of yous could become president. You know, think about what you're doing and strive to do the best that you can so that wrongful convictions don't happen and yous can go on to be productive people in society. Thank you. You're welcome. I just hope I didn't bore them. You're welcome.
You should be playing head with your son.
Yeah, you're
So
welcome.
much in common. So
You're welcome.